Hello and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art. Week by week, moment by moment, we are following Allie K. Dakers, teacher, actor, director, and producer, as she shapes the development of her innovative middle school drama club program and guides her students' idiosyncratic artistic journeys. Today we'll be focusing on the drama club meeting that took place on November 14th. And as it turns out, the kids came into this meeting almost totally unfocused. However, the good news here was that Allie planned to devote part of the lesson to discussing the concept of focus. So in a weird way, it worked out okay.
Perfect timing.
Yes, perfect timing. And speaking of which, for those of you who have been following us, and you know that the emotion commotion groups have been presenting and that we had 2 left to go. And Allie wanted to give them about 5 minutes of rehearsal / preparation time before they presented. And in order to accomplish this, Allie decided to have a veteran student lead one of the exercises with the rest of the drama club members. And that freed up Allie to be able to be with the emotion commotion groups. Now, I think here we see an example of the club's student-centric approach so well. Here is a student in a leadership position, which I imagine is empowering for the student. He serves as a role model in a leadership position for the other kids. And I think tacitly, Allie, you really communicate to the kids that you trust them and you have the utmost confidence in their abilities. Mm-hmm. And needless to say, it enables you to accomplish a lot more and have the meeting itself be more productive this way. Mm-hmm. So it seems that this approach is showing results already because, interestingly, while Allie was working with the emotion commotion groups, she could hear that the kids doing the exercise were starting to yell a great deal. But you also told me you heard them sort of figure out how to kind of pull it all together, regroup using techniques that they had learned, and then be able to proceed and finish. And I thought to myself, wow, I would imagine that success must have been empowering to these kids. They did it without you.
Yeah, they did. It was one of the first times that I did sort of enlist them to manage themselves. The older kids do know that they're going to have to manage themselves later on, and so this was the first time where, without any adult supervision whatsoever, I'm in the same room but far across from them. Right. The younger ones had to understand, oh, okay, so, you know, the teacher's not here right now. Who am I listening to? Who's the point person? What is my role? What is their role? And how do we make this all work together? And they did a good job. I mean, you know, yes, there was some yelling. Yes, there was some chaos as they're trying to figure out the game and what are we doing. But I heard a group of kids, not with any frustration in their voice, but definitely like almost like a decision was made. And then I heard like a whole like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Everyone's like, shh, everybody shush, you know, that kind of a thing. But it wasn't rudely done. It was just done, you know, with assertion, with control. And the kids, you know, they got it together. So it was good.
That's terrific, and I'm sure we'll be seeing that more and more as the year progresses, and probably with greater and greater efficiency and effectiveness.
Hopefully. Yeah, that's a game plan.
There's process for you.
Yeah.
Well, since all of the kids in one of the 2 emotion commotion groups were not present, it was determined they would need to perform next week. But that left one group of veteran actors, and it turned out that they produced a scene that had a lot of strong dramatic arcs, a lot of flair, a lot of emotional expression, and energy. So, Allie, if you could take us through a little bit of the highlights, because apparently they really did a super job here.
Yeah, they did. They constructed a scene where a group of people were rooting for a team on the television of some game, whatever, sports, etc. And they really did their use of the space, their use of their body language, their use of the way they related to one another, you know, crowding in at the same time, moving back at the same time. All of the choreography, if you will, was there. It wasn't visibly planned out in the sense where, like, you know, they knew, like, at this point we're going to move in. They just were responding to each other. You can tell kind of like it was almost like a flow. Someone took the lead, we moved back, all of this. So physically they were in tune with each other. Emotionally they were in tune with each other. It was like this roller coaster. You know, we went through like anticipation, obviously, like something was going to happen with like a, you know, a tense point in the game. Then that moment was lost and they're like anger and yelling and and there wasn't like a decision of when these things were going to happen. Someone would start it and everybody was in sync to react in the same way.
Wow.
And finally we ended with celebration. So clearly the team won, or whatever the case may be. One of the things I thought that was really interesting was their incorporation of props and things by their own choice, their own decision. They took it to the next level, but they did do it in like a really rudimentary way. They didn't need anything too fancy. One of the kids had like a folder or a textbook and ripped up little pieces of paper and put it on there like it was like snacks or something, and brought it in at a pinnacle moment of the scene. It was like the celebration moment, I think, or something. So then when things exploded, they tossed that up in the air, and so there's all papers fluttering and flying down. Someone like knocked over a chair. Like, it was all this chaos in the scene, but it completely worked. And and they, you know, they guided themselves to make those choices, and they used what they had. It didn't have to be elaborate, but it was effective, and that was really impressive.
That must have been great to see.
Yeah, it was great. It was great to watch. It was great because it was so meaty and there was so much to talk about with the group for them to look at, reflect on. So it was really cool. So I couldn't have chosen like a better scene to just kind of make that, you know, really obvious and really happen for them. So
exactly, because Allie, as she does all of the time now when scenes are presented, had the kids do their analyze, critique, compliment exercise, and it seems that the kids are really on the same page as Allie in their assessment of how well their peers had done, because they thought that all of the changes in the scene were clear to the audience, and all of the characters' emotions read very well. So, you know, kudos all around to the performers and to the audience members who were able to pick that up. And I saw, Allie, that you are already actively facilitating your students' understanding of process.
yes, very much so.
Because Allie asked the group that performed this particular scene to think about their process. How did the construction of their scene evolve over time? And we were able to see the evolution in their thinking, in particular around a stated goal of trying to figure out how they could play it in a way that would make it clearest to the audience, how it would read really clearly. So I see that you're really having them think in terms of process, analyze in terms of process, and in so doing, I would imagine, really come to instinctively understand what that means. Over time.
I'd asked them if they had, because I knew they were an advanced group, and I knew that they probably were very thoughtful about what they were doing. So I said, did you make any changes along the way? Did you run into any obstacles that you realized you needed to kind of change course to make right? And they said that originally their scene were two different groups, so one rooting for one team, one rooting for the other, against each other, but they knew that the task at hand was to show change, and they didn't want it to get so muddled, because you might see a lot of different conflicting things, and while that wouldn't be wrong or incorrect, they as a group made a choice. We want to make strong choices, clear choices, very obvious choices that we could all commit to and roll with together as a scene. And so it was interesting that they were being mindful of that. I was happy that they had made some changes along the way, so we can, as a group, as an entire group, kind of see the process and have that conversation regarding process, and that we do need to change things along the way to make things more effective, and that we won't always be using every idea and whatnot. So it was a good opportunity to share that.
Yeah, that was fantastic. And as it turns out, the kids who were watching were far more focused than certainly they had been in the beginning.
Yes, very much so.
Of the day. So that was great to see. And that probably paved the way to move on to the next portion of the meeting, which was Allie's formal introduction of the club's motto of commitment, focus, and respect. Yeah. Now, of course, the veteran kids know what the motto is, so Allie gave them the chance to sort of think about it for a minute, get together, and then collectively shout it out. So it was a little mini bonding moment for those kids at that time. And then she proceeded to essentially dissect each of the three components of the motto with the new kids, asking them what they think each of those terms / dynamics means. And then I think on a maybe higher order level, you asked them to then think about how each of those dynamics plays out on stage. Yeah. And I understand that was a little bit tougher for the new guys to answer, whereas the veterans were able to kind of step in at that point and explain. And it also gave you an interesting opportunity to reference from 1 or 2 weeks ago an example of respect in action when, as our colleagues may remember, the stage had been redone for the high school production of A Chorus Line, and being respectful of the stage and wanting to make sure that it was not harmed in any way, the middle school club shifted to another location, and clearly you were respecting the stage, the work, to make sure that everything would go smoothly. And perhaps most important, you kind of pulled the lens back and really explained to the kids the purpose of having this motto in the first place. And it struck me because you really showed how the elements, those three elements, support the functioning of the club. And when that happens, the club itself becomes successful. And so you really tied it in right from the beginning. Yeah, and it's most important that they formulate the definitions and they create those correlations, those connections. We break each one down in the sense of focus is, yes, you need to tend to what we're doing here, but also like don't walk into that set piece. It really is literal and it's figurative. The same thing with commitment is like show up when you need to be there, but also commit to your character. Don't break character in the middle of a scene. It's all of these things can relate on and off the stage, figuratively, literally. And we do talk about how that really can kind of transcend beyond the stage entirely, carrying these facets with you, these tenets with you. It does spill over and it can affect other aspects of your life as well. That is the bigger picture entirely, as we spoke about in previous videocasts, that it's not just about creating character. It's like creating character like your own, and starting to hear them talk a little bit in that direction was really nice, and we will absolutely revisit that in a much broader sense at the end of the entire process. We really kind of reflect on that. So, well, I think those initiatives on your part made that commitment, the concepts of commitment, focus, and respect really relevant, as opposed to just some abstract comments that abstract ideas that you kind of get but maybe don't relate to. And from there, Allie capitalized on the thinking and discussing the motto's concepts by breaking the kids up into groups of 5 to work on posters that would reflect the motto. But interestingly, Allie, here seems to be an example of your learning as a director through process, what seems to work well and what perhaps could use some adjusting, and you thought to yourself, hey, in the future I think I would break up the kids into smaller groups. Why, in your opinion, would that be more effective?
Some groups were functional, others were not. I think it was a little too early in the process to have so many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. I don't know that it's one thing when you're working on a scene, like even just the physical space of it, having more space between you and another human gives you some breathing room, and we can kind of like air things out a little easier. We can take a moment, walk away, come back, even if it's just a couple of seconds. But when we're a small group, literally crowded, literally hanging over this paper, the heat is there. So when you have ideas and people are not necessarily. They don't necessarily have the skills intact as well as they need to share ideas and to be cool with if their idea isn't chosen. There's a lot of more opportunity for that to bubble up, Right. So I would have done smaller groups and whatnot. There were a couple of groups in particular that really either they weren't really on task with what they needed to do in terms of understanding, like again, just too many, like let's add this, let's add that, let's add this, whether it was relevant or not was not necessarily considered. Right. Or there's like the petty fighting over ideas, too many cooks in the kitchen in terms of like, you're going to make a mess and not agreeing on where to start, where to go from there. So, yeah.
Well, it's interesting because this poster activity gave rise to a set of dynamics that I would like to take some time now to discuss because they were quite challenging. And I'm assuming, Allie, that what we're about to describe is not an isolated incident. Maybe in the exact details, but in the overall and underlying dynamics, not so much. So I'm really interested in how you handled the situation. So for our colleagues, here's the overall summary of it. You had a kid who had his own ideas about what he wanted to do that really had nothing to do with the assigned task. He perceived that his peers would not listen to his ideas. He could not understand why they wouldn't listen to them, and then decided to remove himself from the group, but perceived/articulated to Allie that he was kicked out of the group, which in fact he was not, but his perception or his assertion at the very least was that had occurred. So, Allie, 2-part question. One, of course, how did you handle this very challenging situation? And perhaps more broadly, how do you think about balancing the needs of the individual and the needs of the group? Because I imagine, especially in this kind of setting, you're really trying to do a number of things simultaneously to develop the individual over time and build group cohesion and enhance group functionality. So that's a heavy-duty load, it seems to me, to be able to carry, and inevitably, of course, is going to inform the way you handle specific instances. So where do you hear this one?
So the student was struggling with understanding what the task was to begin with. It was as if he was not there for the conversation of the 3 aspects of the motto. Right. And so he was like, let's put this on the poster, let's put that on the poster. And the kids, actually, I could tell that the kids were being pretty considerate with him in terms of how they were talking to him, how they were trying to help him understand. but growing frustrated. You could see it. I mean, they're like, why won't he just do this? And that happens. I mean, that happens when a kid isn't understanding and they're working in a group. And so I tried to explain to him what the task was, and then he was like, well, I want to put this on the poster. And we're like, well, that's not really related to the task. And then he went on about how, well, why can't I do that anyway? And we explained it again. And then we said, well, we can take your idea and kind of blend it into this idea. And he had the idea, I mean, if we're going to get into specifics, he wanted to create kind of like a building or something, which is totally fine. It actually could really work if we almost have like the foundational blocks of like what we're doing. And then he started to go off on not really feeling that his idea was original anymore, and he didn't want to use it because it wasn't original. So I explained, actually, there are only about 8 plot lines in all of literary repertoire. So everything is not really original when you think about it. Everything's a spin-off of something else. And he wasn't entertained by that thought. It was a little over his head. It was more for me and for the rest of the group, too, to get that information out.
Right.
So I got to the point where I had to go tend to the rest of the group. I had to say, listen, look around. I said, literally, look around. I have many other kids here, many other groups. I said, your group they never kicked you out. I understand you feel that way. It definitely feels like that when our ideas aren't being accepted. But they are literally inviting you back and literally telling you, please, let's do this. Here's something you can do. Here's the colored pencil. Why don't you do this? And so I let him know I have to go tend to these other groups. I'll be back. Let's see how we can do. And I moved around the groups, and then I did check in. I looked over my shoulder maybe 2-3 minutes later, and he was working on that poster. I was like, okay, good. And then a few moments later, he was, off on his own again, and I could hear the energy rising over there. And I looked over at the group looking at me, very frustrated. I don't know what to do. What are we going to do here? And again, I tapped in with him, and I said, what's going on here? He said, they're excluding me. And I said, well, did they tell you can't be in our group anymore, or did you remove yourself from the group? Again, trying to get him to understand the difference. And he said, well, I removed myself because they're excluding me. And I was like, let's look at that a little bit. He was not really able to listen at that time. His perception was just kind of where it was. And so in that context, I said, okay, so what would you like to do? Because I don't want you just to sit here. This isn't going to be valuable for you if you're just sitting here. I explained to him separately again what each of these 3 words were. I gave him the words to look at so that he can copy them and spell them and all of these things. And I gave him his own paper. And I was like, you know what? Let's make something anyway. Why don't you contribute? I really don't want you to not contribute. You've got great ideas. We can make this work. And I gave him his own to do. So he didn't work with a group at that time. He ended up doing his own. And at that time, that was the best decision for him and for his group, or else they would have never moved forward, either of them. So that's kind of where we left it at that, He seemed okay by the end. He was happy to have his own poster. It's not the ideal. The whole point was to be collaborative. So I'm going to be keeping a close eye on him and to see if these behaviors kind of repeat and see if there's any change in how either he's responding or how the group is responding if he's in a group. I may also talk with all the groups and then maybe specifically his to kind of help ideas get set up a little bit before letting them go on their own, or reminding us, of what is our goal, going over very clearly what, the expectations are. So that's how I'm going to move forward with him. And any, when we run into these kind of situations, you do kind of have to take a step back, take a breath. Maybe he was hungry, maybe he was tired, maybe there's a lot of other factors at play that honestly it was, so you got to consider all of those things, but it doesn't change the fact that a task needs to be accomplished and he needs to be, able to kind of apply what he needs to accomplish the task with the group. So we'll be keeping an eye on that.
And that ultimately, it sounds like from what you described, may be, truly a process.
Yeah.
His ability to do what you really needed him to be able to do may be limited now. It may be limited for a while, who knows?
Yeah.
But it sounds like you really worked with what you did know as best as possible. As you said, there's a lot you don't know.
Absolutely.
So, and probably would not be able to find out at that point. So it sounded like you remained open and flexible enough to tweak circumstances to keep him from completely isolating and still enabling the group to move forward. Again, no easy task.
No.
And it may mean, I guess, compromising, bending what you were originally set out to do, but perhaps that's the best it's going to be under the circumstances.
Exactly.
This is a specific contextual challenge.
Yeah, and I mean, at this stage, they're just making a poster, but when they're alone backstage and managing the running of their own production, that's when, that's when it matters a lot more than we're making a poster. So I'll definitely be kind of keeping an eye, monitoring how his particular process is moving along in terms of those dynamics, and making sure if maybe it's a matter of something that I can be doing differently. Maybe I need to explain things differently, like I mentioned, things like that. So I'll definitely be taking a look at my own process related to him and how he operates.
And perhaps I'm thinking also you've taken various different dynamics that have cropped up along the way and referenced them much later when a certain subject comes up. Remember when this played out back then, and perhaps you'd be able to compare and contrast the way in which it played out and was handled at this point in time versus maybe a month from now, for example, or 3 months from now, and show the growth, show the development, show the process. So I would imagine really everything is grist for the mill then, from that perspective.
Yeah, it all.
So finally, Allie and I talked about her preference for embedding concepts in conversations so that the kids really learn them in context. Allie, can you talk a little more about your attempt to facilitate what you described to me as your students' discovery of knowledge as or of concepts as separate and distinct from superimposing them as sort of outside-in ideas?
Yeah, a lot of times it's through language. The way that I'm presenting material, I'll take an example of what some of the kids are working with. I'll embed vocabulary and explain what something might be, but more in relationship to exactly what they're doing. And I'll say, well, how did you do this? What is this? And I'll say, oh, well, that's this. Did you know that? Ba, 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 ba. And they begin to gain a larger breadth of knowledge, but it's through their own work. So in that sense, it becomes empowering. And they're like, oh, I didn't even know I knew that. Like, maybe I just know the words. I'm like, but you did know it. Look at you. Now here's the words. Here's how we describe this that you understand. Here's how this is what the language that we use. Or this is how we can stretch this nugget of knowledge that you have or that you've noticed. Now let's build upon that and understanding and take it deeper and make connections and branch off of that. And now let's have a conversation, bringing in more people about this and grow the idea and create, a stronger foundation that we then can continue to build all of that knowledge on. But at the crux of it, that very beginning, where that seed that it grew from was something that they created or something that they formulated or they noticed. And that, I think, is where the discovery comes from. And then to be able to relate that back and then use that in the future on their terms and with their own words at this point. Right. That's really where that empowerment facet comes from. So.
And if they are then, as you say, using their own words, it sounds as if they really almost begin from an internalized place. As you said, I'm thinking of the metaphor of the image of the seed, planting within right from the beginning and cultivating it and growing it in a context that's idiosyncratic, using their words,
Yeah.
and then, okay,
Yeah.
now we see, in the external context, how these things are discussed and thought about and referred to. But it seems to me already it's embedded within them in a way that is not simply, oh, I learned X and I just recite it and regurgitate it to you upon demand.
Yeah, that's not what I'm looking for in the work that we're doing. Yeah,
exactly. So there were certainly a lot of dynamics that played out in this particular meeting that, as Allie and I discussed, will likely surface again and again.
Definitely.
And I think give the kids, give Allie, and give Allie and I, in the context of the Videocast, a lot of opportunities to see all of this evolve over time and share it with you. So as usual, we thank you for joining us and being part of the process. And stay tuned till next week for the next edition. Have a good night.
Thank you.